At 3:27 in the morning, the marble floors of Giovanni Romano's Chicago mansion lay silent and perfect. Not a speck of dust dared settle on the white stone, not a sound disturbed the darkness. The kitchen gleamed like a photograph of wealth, stainless steel appliances worth more than most people's homes, granite countertops that caught the moonlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the faint smell of lemon polish clinging to everything. Then came the sound. A collapse. A wet, gasping sob that echoed through the service entrance like a gunshot in the silence. Cassandra Hayes crumpled through the kitchen door at 3:06 in the morning, and the first thing she did was bleed on the marble. She was 27 years old but looked decades older. Her black and white maid uniform hung in tatters from her left shoulder, soaked with melting snow that had turned pink with fresh blood. One eye was swollen completely shut, the skin around it a purple so dark it looked like ink spreading through water. Handprint bruises circled her pale throat like a necklace of violence, 5 fingers pressed into her skin hard enough to leave marks that would take weeks to fade. Blood dripped from a gash above her left eyebrow. Drip. 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 Each drop echoed across the white floor like a clock counting down to something terrible. She clutched her ribs with shaking hands, gasping breath so shallow they barely fogged the cold air still clinging to her skin. The scent of copper blood mixed with the industrial floor cleaner she had used just hours before on these same floors. Her lips were cracked and bleeding at the corners. Her dark hair, which she always kept pinned neatly beneath her uniform cap, hung matted and wild around her face. In the adjacent dining room, Giovanni Romano sat at the head of a mahogany table so long it could seat 20 people. He was a man of 43 years, built broad across the shoulders like a boxer who had stopped boxing only to become something more dangerous. His dark hair was silvered at the temples, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, a memento from a disagreement in his younger years about respect and territory. He wore an Italian suit that cost more than Cassandra earned in 6 months, the jacket unbuttoned, his white shirt open at the collar showing the dark hair on his chest. A gold watch the size of a coin glinted on his left wrist. His dark eyes held the calm of a man accustomed to absolute control. Across from him sat Vinny and Luca, men who had worked for Giovanni for 15 years. They wore the uniform of the organization, dark suits, gold rings, expensive watches, and they moved through the world with the particular kind of confidence that came from knowing nobody would stop them. They were discussing territory. Specifically, they were discussing what would happen to a man named Marcus Webb who had been skimming money and selling information to their rivals. The conversation was conducted in the low, measured tones of men who had done this kind of planning many times before. Then the sound came. A collapse. Knees hitting tile. A choked sob that made all 3 men freeze. Giovanni's dark eyes snapped toward the doorway. He rose slowly, his chair scraping against hardwood with a sound like a warning. Vinny and Luca's hands moved instinctively toward the concealed weapons they always carried. But Giovanni raised one hand, and the gesture was enough. The hand stopped moving. Even these dangerous men answered to him without question. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and saw her there. Cassandra Hayes was crumpled on the floor like a doll with its strings cut, bleeding onto the marble she had just spent for hours polishing. She did not look up. She did not speak. She could not. Her breath came in short, panic gasps, and her whole body trembled like a small animal caught in a trap. Something moved across Giovanni's face. It was not anger. It was not mercy. It was something colder and more dangerous than either. His jaw tightened. His hands, hanging at his sides, curled into fists and then released. He stood there in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, something changed. He moved into the kitchen with the measured precision of a man accustomed to deliberate action. Every step was controlled. Every movement had weight behind it. When he crouched beside her, the fabric of his expensive suit pressed against the bloody marble floor without any sign that he noticed or cared. "Do not move," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Help is coming. Do not move." Cassandra could not answer. Her throat was too damaged. What came from her mouth was barely a sound, a whisper like wind through a broken window. Vinny appeared in the doorway with his phone already in his hand. Luca had disappeared. 15 years of loyalty meant knowing exactly what to do without being told. He was calling for the doctor. The doctor who kept Giovanni's men alive when they needed to stay alive. The doctor who did not ask questions and did not keep records. Giovanni's hands hovered over her, not quite touching, as if he was afraid she might shatter under his fingers. His dark eyes moved across her injuries with the methodical assessment of a man who had learned to evaluate damage quickly and accurately. He saw the bruises on her throat. He saw the pattern of them. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Something that looked like recognition. Like memory. In the adjacent room, Vinny and Luca exchanged a look neither had seen in 15 years. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Romano, they had never seen him move toward someone with gentleness. They had seen him move toward people with precision. With purpose. With cold efficiency. But never with gentleness. Cassandra's eye, the one that was not swollen shut, looked up at him. In that eye was a question. Why would this man, this dangerous man in his expensive suit bleeding on the floor beside her, why would he stop and help instead of stepping around her and continuing his evening? But what she did not know was that this man recognized the exact pattern of those bruises. He had seen them before. He had seen them on someone he failed to save. And that failure had shaped him into something harder, something colder, something that moved through the world crushing anyone who put their hands on someone they were not supposed to touch. Now, let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand how an invisible maid ended up bleeding on marble at 3:51 in the morning. Let us go back 12 days, to a time when Cassandra Hayes still had something left to lose. The apartment where Cassandra lived had once been a storage closet. That was not a metaphor. It had actually been converted from a storage closet in the basement of a building on the south side of Chicago. The walls were cinder block painted a shade of beige that tried very hard to be cheerful and failed completely. There was one small window set high on the wall that looked out at street level, so when people walked by outside, all you could see were their shoes and ankles and the occasional dropped coin or crumpled cigarette pack. The rent was $590 a month. Cassandra paid it by working 2 jobs. She was an invisible maid in Giovanni Romano's mansion for nights a week, working from 8 in the evening until 6 in the morning. She was a waitress at a diner called Pete's Place 5 days a week, working the 6 to 2 shift, standing on her feet for 8 hours at a time, refilling coffee that nobody tipped her for and clearing plates of food she would never be able to afford to eat. On this particular morning, 12 days before she would collapse on the marble floor, Cassandra sat on her narrow bed with a piece of paper in her hands. The paper was a notice from the hospital. It was from 3 months ago, and she had not paid it because she did not have the money, and when you do not have the money, the paper just sits in front of you, growing heavier. The notice said, $22,000 in outstanding medical bills. Due within 12 days or property foreclosure and wage garnishment will commence. She looked at the money in her hands. She had counted it 3 times to make sure she was not making a mistake. $200. That was all that remained. $200 was supposed to cover groceries until the end of the week, cover bus fare, cover the small emergencies that happened every day when you were poor and living on the edge of nothing. $200 versus $22,000. The mathematics of her life had never made sense, but they made particularly no sense at this moment. The hospital bill was from the surgery. The surgery that had happened 2 years ago, after her husband died and left her with medical debt and a property deed that should have been hers but somehow belonged to someone else now, a property deed in the hands of a man named Marcus Webb who had been married to Victoria Ashford, and somehow, through documents she still did not fully understand, through signatures that looked like her father's but happened after he was already dead, somehow the deed had become Marcus's property to sell or hold or destroy as he pleased. She had been married to James Hayes for 4 years. He had been a good man. He had worked construction. He had loved her in the quiet, steady way of someone who just showed up every day and did the work. They had not been rich. They had been ordinary. They had had a small house with a porch and a garden where she grew tomatoes. They had talked about having children someday. Then he got sick. The doctor said it was something in his blood, something that had been building and building until it could not be stopped. The surgery was supposed to help. The surgery cost $47,000. After the insurance and the negotiating and everything else, it still cost $22,000 out of pocket, the exact amount now sitting in a notice on her bed. The surgery did not help. James died anyway. 3 days after the surgery, he was gone, and she was alone in a hospital room with a bill that spelled out the cost of her grief in numbers. After he died, her father had taken her in. He had let her sleep in the guest room. He had let her eat at his table. But her father was a man who believed in the natural order of things, in the way the world had always worked, in the superiority of bloodlines and pedigree. When he married Victoria Ashford 6 months after James died, everything changed. Victoria Ashford was a woman of 52 years who moved through the world with the particular cruelty of someone who had never been told no. She had a biological son named Marcus Webb, a man of 38 with the soft hands of someone who had never worked a day in his life. When they married, Victoria became the owner of everything in Cassandra's father's house, including the small property deed that James had left her, the deed to the cottage by the lake where they had honeymooned, where he had held her hand and talked about their future. Within 3 months, the deed was in Marcus's name. Within 6 months, Cassandra's father was dead. Within 9 months, she was on the street with nothing but her work clothes and a photograph. The photograph was the only thing she had kept from her old life. It showed her and James on their wedding day, taken outside a small church. She was wearing a dress that her mother had worn, altered to fit her, and James was in a suit that cost $90 from a discount store. They were both smiling like people who believed the future would belong to them. She kept the photograph in the back pocket of her jeans, always with her, always a reminder of when she had been someone. Now, 12 days before the collapse on the marble floor, Cassandra sat on her bed in her basement storage closet and tried to figure out how to make $200 into $22,000 in exactly 12 days. The mathematics of this problem was impossible. She went to work that night at Giovanni Romano's mansion. She moved through the halls in her black and white uniform, which was the only clothing she was allowed to wear while she was there. The rule was that she should be invisible. She should move silently. She should erase all traces of the wealth she would never possess, leaving the rooms perfect and empty, as if money itself had cleaned them without any human intervention required. The mansion was enormous. There were 17 rooms on the ground floor alone. There were corridors that stretched for what felt like miles. There were bathrooms with marble counters and bathroom fixtures that cost more than her annual rent. There were bedrooms where people slept in sheets with a thread count she could not even comprehend. She moved through all of it unseen. The men who worked for Giovanni knew she was there, they had seen her countless times, but they did not acknowledge her. Acknowledgement meant she existed. The rule was that she did not exist. She was part of the machinery of their world, like the air conditioning or the plumbing. At 4:36 in the morning, when her shift was nearly finished, she received a text message on the old phone that still had 30% battery life remaining. The message was from Marcus Webb. It said, "We need to talk about your husband's property. Where are you?" She did not respond. She had learned that responding to Marcus created complications. Complications led to confrontation, and confrontation was dangerous. But Marcus Webb was not the kind of man who accepted silence as a response. Marcus Webb was a man who had taken everything from her and believed he was entitled to take more. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a like if this story is hitting you in the heart. Share it with someone you care about and subscribe so you do not miss a single moment of what is coming. Because in just 12 days, everything will change. Now let us return to the story. 3 months earlier, before the blizzard, before the black SUVs, before Giovanni Romano's eyes found hers in the kitchen and saw something he had not seen in 15 years, before any of that, Cassandra Hayes was nobody. She arrived at the mansion at 5:19 in the morning when Chicago was still swallowing darkness, when the November wind cut through the streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Her breath fogged in front of her face. She wore the uniform and a black dress that hung 2 sizes too large on her frame, a white apron with precisely folded corners, a white collar that scratched her neck. Her brown hair was pulled so tight into a bun that by noon her scalp throbbed with a dull, constant ache. She did not complain about the ache. She did not complain about anything. The mansion stretched across an entire city block. 12,000 square feet of marble floors that reflected light like water, crystal chandeliers that hung from ceilings so high they seemed to touch the sky itself, and rooms, so many rooms, that she cleaned with meticulous care but would never enter as a guest, never sit in, never exist in as anything other than the machinery that kept the space perfect and empty and cold. She was one of 4 household staff. There was Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, a woman of 63 with grey threaded through her black hair and a spine curved from 30 years of labor. There were 2 other maids, Rosa and Keisha, who arrived at different hours and whose shifts barely overlapped with Cassandra's. And then there was Cassandra, the invisible one. The one who moved through the hallways at dawn and dusk when the main family was sleeping or absent, leaving no trace of her passing except the absence of dust, the shine of cleaned surfaces, the erasure of any evidence that human beings lived here at all. She had been hired 6 weeks earlier by a man named Vinny, who did not ask her many questions and did not seem to care about references. He simply looked at her thin frame, her tired eyes, her calloused hands, and said, "You start Monday. 5:30 a.m. Basement entrance. You do not speak to the family. You do not make eye contact with guests. You do not acknowledge that you exist. You clean and you leave. The pay is $9 an hour, cash, no paperwork. You understand?" She understood. Cassandra Hayes had learned the language of invisibility years ago. It began after Thomas died. Thomas, who had been a construction foreman with steady hands and a laugh that filled their small house in Evanston. Thomas, who had taken out a life insurance policy for $50,000 because he loved her that much. Thomas, who had stepped off a building that was not yet finished on a Tuesday in March and fell. The funeral had been small. His co-workers came. Her father came. But her stepmother Victoria had not come, and her half-brother Marcus had sent flowers instead, white lilies that smelled like decay, like the closing of doors. Victoria Ashford had always been beautiful in the way that glass is beautiful, sharp and reflective and hollow inside. She had married Cassandra's father when Cassandra was 9 years old, and from that moment forward, the household had belonged to Victoria and her biological son Marcus. Cassandra had learned young that some people command the world through presence, and others disappear into the corners through lack of alternative. After Thomas died, when Cassandra was alone and grieving and still holding the paperwork for their Evanston house, Victoria had appeared at her apartment door wearing a black dress and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am so sorry, sweetheart," Victoria had said, her voice smooth as oil. "You cannot possibly manage all of this on your own. Your father and I discussed it. We think you should sign power of attorney over to me. Just temporarily. Until you are strong again. Just while you grieve." Cassandra had signed because she was 25 years old and destroyed, and Victoria was her stepmother and her father trusted Victoria completely. It took her 3 months to understand what had happened. It took her discovering the forged documents. It took a phone call from the bank asking about her authorization to sell the house. It took her finding out that her stepmother had emptied every account, cashed out the life insurance, listed herself as the beneficiary on things that were never supposed to have beneficiaries. It took her arriving at her childhood home to find it had been sold to a developer. It took her going to her father and saying, "Papa, she stole everything," and having her father look at her with eyes full of disappointment and say, "She showed me your prescriptions, Cassandra. The ones for the pills. For your addiction. Your brother confirmed it. I cannot help someone who will not help herself." But there had been no prescriptions. There had never been addiction. There had only been forgery and betrayal and a father who loved his wife more than his daughter. In the 2 years that followed, Cassandra lost her house, her savings, her family, and then her apartment. She lived in a woman's shelter for 8 months. She worked double shifts at a diner on Clark Street where the manager did not give her tips that were owed and the customers did not tip at all. She ate the food that customers left behind, the bread they did not finish, the eggs that had gone cold on the plate. She saved every dollar and finally rented a studio apartment in South Chicago, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors' arguments, where the heating system worked on odd days and not on even days, where the monthly rent consumed everything she made and left her with $43 for food until her next paycheck. She was surviving. She was not living. There was a difference that mattered. Giovanni Romano's mansion was a different kind of prison. She entered through the basement door at 5:38 in the morning and climbed the narrow stairs to the main floor. The kitchen was her first stop. She cleaned the industrial refrigerator, the 6-burner stove, the marble countertop. She wiped each surface with a cloth she washed by hand every evening, using a bar of soap that cost 75 cents. The kitchen was larger than her entire apartment. The stove alone had cost $8,000. She knew this because she had once overheard Luca, another lieutenant, telling Vinny about it. From the kitchen, she moved to the dining room, where a table of dark wood that had been imported from Italy sat beneath a chandelier with 240 individual crystal pieces. She dusted each piece once weekly, standing on a ladder that made her arms ache, counting down from 240 to 1 with the careful precision of someone who could not afford to miss a single crystal. A table like this cost more than she would earn in 3 years. The chairs surrounding it cost more than her first car, the one she had sold 2 years ago to pay for her father's medical bills before she learned that Victoria had already convinced him to change his will. The study was the last room on her morning route, the one that required the most care and the one where she was most likely to encounter Giovanni Romano himself. The study occupied the eastern corner of the mansion's main floor. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with volumes that looked unread, their spines unbent and uncracked. A fireplace took up the 4th wall, with a marble mantelpiece and a painting above it, a landscape of the Tuscan countryside that had belonged to Giovanni's grandfather. The desk was mahogany, inlaid with details so precise it looked like carved lace. On the desk sat a computer, a telephone, and a single-framed photograph of a young boy, no more than 5 years old, with dark hair and his father's eyes. Cassandra had never asked about the boy. Questions were not part of her function. Every morning at 5:27, she entered the study. Every morning at 5:27, she cleaned around the desk without touching the photograph, without moving the computer, without disturbing a single thing that belonged to Giovanni Romano. She entered the trash bin. She dusted the shelves with a soft cloth. She vacuumed the floor in precise rows, the lines perfectly parallel, the carpet looking as though no one had ever walked on it at all. By 6:15, she was finished, and she backed out of the room and closed the door silently behind her. On her 4th week of employment, Giovanni was sitting at his desk when she entered. She did not see him at first. The room was still dim with pre-dawn light. The lamp on the desk was off. She thought the room was empty, as it always was, and she opened the door and stepped inside and then froze, because sitting at the desk, looking at a folder of papers with the kind of intensity usually reserved for matters of life and death, was the man whose mansion this was. Giovanni Romano was 42 years old. He was 6 feet 1 inch tall, with the kind of broad-shouldered frame that comes from genetics and violence in equal measure. His dark hair was beginning to silver at the temples. His eyes were a shade between grey and black, and they held the kind of coldness that comes from making decisions about other people's lives without hesitation. He wore a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, showing the inside of his forearms, where a scar ran from his wrist to his elbow like a blade had once tried to cut his arm in half. His left hand held a pen. His right hand held a gun. Cassandra saw the gun and her body forgot how to move. The pause lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 hours. Then Giovanni looked up, and his eyes passed over her, and he returned his attention to his papers. He had acknowledged her the way one acknowledges a piece of furniture, with complete absence of recognition. She backed out of the room. She cleaned the study later, after he left. But something had changed in that 3-second pause. Something cold and sharp had moved in her chest, a feeling that had no name but felt like danger and safety existing in the same breath. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away from the mansion, in a penthouse in Lincoln Park where the floor was made of Italian marble and the windows overlooked the entire city, Victoria Ashford was reviewing documents at a glass table with her biological son Marcus Webb. Marcus was 29 years old, handsome in the way that cruel people often are, with athletic shoulders and eyes that had never learned to feel compassion. He wore a suit that cost $2,000. His watch was a Rolex. His shoes were Italian leather. Everything about him was expensive and everything about him was wrong. Victoria laid the papers out in front of him, her manicured nails, painted a deep crimson, tapping against each document with precision. Her blonde hair was platinum and expensive and arranged in a style that required monthly maintenance at a salon where the haircut cost $300. Her face was smooth in the way that comes from injections and procedures, all the lines of age chemically erased, leaving her looking perpetually 40 instead of 52. "The property is officially in our names now," she said, her voice smooth as poison poured into wine. "The Evanston house sold for $340,000. The life insurance policy paid out at $50,000. There were additional savings accounts she did not even know about. We found $12,000 more tucked away in an old account she opened when she was 18. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and he smiled. $402,000. $402,000, Victoria repeated. "And she has nothing. Not a dime. Not even the pathetic life insurance money. All of it is ours." "What about the father?" Victoria's smile became sharper, more dangerous. "Your stepfather is a weak man. I showed him prescriptions forged in her name. Said she had a drug problem. Showed him bills from rehab facilities we created. He believed every word. He told her himself that he could not help someone who would not help herself. I do not think he will ever speak to her again." Marcus stood and walked to the window. Below, the city of Chicago spread out like a kingdom, every light a piece of wealth, every building a monument to people who had more than enough. Does she know yet? That it is all gone. She is beginning to understand, Victoria said. Her apartment will be gone soon. She has no income left. She is working somewhere, some minimum wage job, living hand to mouth. She is exactly where she deserves to be. Marcus turned from the window. She deserves worse. Victoria stood and joined him, her reflection appearing in the glass beside his. They looked like each other in ways that went beyond genetics. They looked alike in their complete absence of mercy. Perhaps we will ensure that happens, Victoria said. But not yet. First, let her truly understand what she has lost. First, let her feel the full weight of her own insignificance. Back at the mansion, Cassandra was cleaning the living room when her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. She had a phone, a 7-year-old model that barely held a charge, that she kept off most of the time to conserve battery and because almost no one had her number anymore. The text message was from Marcus Webb. "We need to talk about your husband's property. Where are you?" Her hand stopped moving. The cloth she was holding, damp with cleaning solution, hung motionless in the air. She did not respond to Marcus Webb. She had learned that responding created complications, and complications led to confrontation, and confrontation led to danger. But Marcus Webb had never been the kind of man who accepted silence as an answer. He believed silence was a challenge. He believed silence was an invitation to escalate. In the study, Giovanni Romano was unaware of the text message that had just changed everything. The kitchen at the Romano mansion was silent except for the sound of wind battering the windows, snow piling against the glass like a living thing trying to break through. Cassandra stood at the sink, hand submerged in water so hot it turned her skin red, her mind drifting to the weather forecast she had heard on the drive to work that morning. Worst blizzard in 15 years. -8 degrees. Winds gusting at 45 miles per hour. The news anchor had said it with the kind of weight reserved for catastrophes, and Cassandra had felt nothing. Catastrophes were ordinary to her. They came every Tuesday and stayed through Friday. Mrs. Chen, The head cook appeared in the doorway at 5:58 in the evening, her coat already buttoned, her purse already slung over her shoulder. She had worked at the mansion for 12 years and had learned to read the weather in ways that went beyond meteorology. She could feel danger in the air the way birds could feel it before a storm. "Stay tonight," Mrs. Chen said. "The staff quarters have heat. The roads will close. You cannot drive home in this." Cassandra pulled her hands from the water, reaching for the thin cloth towel hanging beneath the sink. Her second job started at 9. The office building downtown, the evening shift, $200 for 4 hours of work. $200 was the difference between keeping her storage unit for another month or losing everything inside it. Everything inside it was Thomas. His watch. His wedding ring. The photo of him standing in front of their house, before everything was stolen, before her stepmother became a thief wearing designer shoes. "I have to go," Cassandra said. "I have another job." "In this weather?" Mrs. Chen's voice carried disapproval and something else. "Pity. That man upstairs, he will not want you driving in a blizzard. He does not care what I do when I am not working here." But even as she said it, Cassandra knew that was no longer entirely true. The 1997 Honda Civic was parked in the service lot, buried under 4 inches of fresh snow. Cassandra brushed it off with her sleeve, her thin coat providing almost no barrier against the cold that had already begun its work of turning her fingers into white, rigid things. The engine started on the third try, and she pulled out onto the Kennedy Expressway at 6:32 in the evening. Other cars had the good sense to pull over. Cassandra kept driving. The windshield wipers fought against snow that fell so thick it seemed to erase the world beyond 3 feet. Cars ahead of her were red ghost shapes moving slowly, then slower, then not moving at all. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands, her one functioning headlight cutting a pale tunnel through the white. The heater had not worked in 3 years. Her breath formed clouds that obscured the glass further. She wiped it with her free hand, over and over, a futile gesture that changed nothing. By 7:15, the highway was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. By 7:23, her engine made a sound like something breaking inside metal, a sound of surrender and defeat. The Civic sputtered twice and died. She coasted to the shoulder, white powder already climbing the doors. She turned the key. Click. 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 Nothing. The temperature inside the car dropped with remarkable speed. Within minutes, her breath became visible in white puffs. Within 10 minutes, she could no longer feel her toes. She tried her phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. The highway was empty and she was invisible here too, just like everywhere else. Just like in the mansion where people looked through her when they looked at her at all. Just like in her family's house before they became people who erased her. Just like on the bus bench where a man had stepped over her foot without acknowledgement or apology. She thought about Thomas. About how he died under construction scaffolding that was not properly secured, about how he had been alone when it happened, about how her stepmother had the funeral on a Tuesday morning specifically because Cassandra was working double shift and could not afford to take the day off. About how by the time Cassandra found out, they had already buried him. Do not think about that. Do not think about any of that. The snow piled higher against the driver's side door. She could see her breath in the darkness, could see it and watch it disappear like she was disappearing, like she was becoming transparent, like soon there would be nothing left at all. At 8:41 in the evening, headlights pierced the white veil. Not one vehicle but 3 black SUVs moving in formation through the blizzard like predators moving through water. They were traveling too fast for conditions, but they were traveling with certainty, as though the road belonged to them in ways it did not belong to ordinary people. The convoy slowed. The convoy stopped. The middle SUV's door opened and Giovanni Romano stepped out into the blizzard wearing a long black coat made from fabric that cost more than every piece of clothing Cassandra had ever owned combined. Snow immediately coated his dark hair. His face was sharp in the whiteout, all angles and control. He approached her car and leaned down to the driver's side window, and even through frosted glass, his eyes met hers with the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He did not ask her to lower the window. He simply pulled the frozen door open with one hand, a gesture of pure physical power that made clear this was not something she could refuse or resist. "You work in my house," he said. Not a question. His voice was deep and carried an accent that surfaced only on certain words, certain syllables. The kind of accent that meant old money, old power, old country roots that ran deeper than dirt. Cassandra nodded, shivering so violently now that her vision blurred. Her lips were numb. She could not form words. Giovanni Romano did not ask permission. He reached into the car and lifted her out of the seat with both arms, holding her against his chest as though she weighed nothing, as though she were made of air and shadow. The cashmere coat was warm. It smelled like expensive cologne and something else, something like leather and smoke and power. She found herself pressing against it instinctively, seeking heat, seeking survival. Vinny held the middle SUV's door open, his eyes wide in a way that suggested this action, this rescue, this unprecedented gesture of care, was something he had never witnessed before. Giovanni set Cassandra on the leather seat and wrapped her in a cashmere blanket that was softer than anything she had ever touched in her entire life. Luca appeared with a thermos of hot coffee, pressing it into her trembling hands. The convoy continued through the blizzard toward the mansion. The East guest suite was larger than her entire apartment. A king bed with silk sheets. A marble bathroom with heated floors. A window that looked out over Chicago's lights, blurred by snow but still luminous, still burning with the kind of wealth that never had to worry about keeping the heat on or rationing milk so it would last through the week. Giovanni stood in the doorway as Cassandra stared at it all. "Mrs. Chen said you prefer to stay in the staff quarters, but they have no heat tonight. The East Wing does. You will stay here." It was not a request. She showered for the first time in years in water so hot it did not run out after 4 minutes. The water kept running. The heat kept warming. She stood there until the numbness faded from her fingers, until she could feel her toes again, until her skin went from white to pink to the color of something alive. Someone had left clothes on the bed. A cashmere sweater in cream. Wool pants that fit perfectly. She dressed carefully, touching the fabric as though it might burn her, as though wearing clothes this expensive was a kind of theft. The sweater was so soft it felt like touching a cloud that had somehow been knitted into something wearable. At 1:30 in the morning, she could not sleep. The bed was too soft, too quiet. In her apartment, you could hear everything. Sirens. The couple next door fighting. The radiator clanking through its death throes. This silence was terrifying in ways that noise never was. She wandered to the kitchen and found Giovanni at the window, standing in darkness, drinking whiskey neat from a crystal glass. Snow fell outside in thick, lazy flakes. He did not turn when she entered but said, "You cannot sleep either." She froze, considered retreating, but something about the late hour and the storm and the cashmere blanket still wrapped around her shoulders made her brave. "The bed is too quiet. Too clean. Too expensive. Sit." She did, perching on a stool at the counter, watching him. He poured a second glass and slid it toward her. "You work 2 jobs. Both of them yours?" Cassandra stared into amber liquid. The whiskey burned but warmed. "I have debt. $22,000 in 12 days or I lose the storage unit. Everything inside it is my late husband. His things. His watch. His rings. Everything the family did not steal when they stole everything else." Giovanni's jaw tightened. She could see muscle working beneath his skin, a physical tell that this information had struck something in him. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Smaller. More human. "My brother was named Dante. We built this organization together from nothing. 5 years ago, he sold our roots to the Giordano family for $2 million. 12 of our men died because of it. I found him in a hotel room in Milwaukee, counting money that had blood on it. He looked me in the eye and said he would do it again for half that amount." Giovanni drank. Family means nothing when trust is gone. Cassandra whispered, I am sorry. Do not apologize for blood betraying blood. It is not your fault. He turned to face her, and in the darkness she could see something in his eyes that had not been there before. Recognition. Understanding. What is your stepmother's name? Victoria Ashford. Her son is Marcus Webb. They stole the house, the insurance money, all of it. Forged documents. Turned my father against me. I have not spoken to him in 14 months. Giovanni's hand tightened on his glass. He set it down carefully, as though controlling every movement was requiring all of his concentration. You will not have to work 2 jobs much longer. She wanted to ask what he meant but did not. Instead she drank her whiskey and sat in silence with a man who had shown her more kindness in one evening than her own blood had shown her in years. The next morning, Marcus Webb was watching the mansion from the street, furious about losing his job, certain that Cassandra had something to do with it, planning something that would bring violence to the quiet morning and change everything that came after. The alley smells like garbage and wet asphalt. Rain falls steadily, turning the pavement black and slick, and Cassandra Hayes does not see Marcus Webb until his hand closes around her arm like a vice, dragging her sideways into the shadows between 2 brick buildings. The evening is cold. The streetlight 3 blocks away casts everything in dim orange haze. Her coat tears slightly at the seam as he pulls her deeper into darkness. You got me fired. His breath smells like stale beer and rage. He is bigger than her, broader through the shoulders, 28 years old and furious in the way men become when their entitlement is threatened. His grip tightens. She tries to pull away and cannot. Marcus, I did not. Shut up. He slams her backward against the brick wall hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Her head strikes concrete. Stars explode across her vision. You have been hiding money. Playing victim while sitting on Thomas's estate. I know you have it. Sign it over. There is nothing left. Victoria took everything. The house, the insurance, all of it. There is nothing. His hand comes up open-palmed and strikes her across the face with the force of a hammer. Her head snaps sideways. Her teeth cut the inside of her cheek. She tastes blood, copper and salt, and she is crying now without meaning to, tears mixing with rain and blood. You are going to sign the deed. His voice drops lower, more dangerous. Or I am going to make sure you do not need money anymore. Both his hands wrap around her throat. He squeezes. Her hands claw at his wrists, at his fingers, and she cannot breathe, cannot pull away, and the pressure builds in her skull like her head is going to split open. The edges of her vision darken. Black creeping in from the sides. She is dying in this alley and nobody will care because she is nobody, just a maid, just a shadow, just air that learned to walk. Then his weight disappears. Cassandra collapses onto the wet pavement, gasping, her throat on fire. She coughs and tears stream down her face. Through the rain and the blur of her vision, she sees him, Giovanni Romano, holding Marcus Webb by the throat, lifting him off his feet like Marcus weighs nothing at all. Giovanni's face is absolutely calm but his eyes are black fire, burning, ancient and furious. Behind him stand Vinny and Luca, their hands inside their jackets, ready. Giovanni's voice is barely above a whisper. But it carries the weight of a bullet. You put your hands on what is mine. Marcus makes a choking sound. His feet dangle 6 inches off the ground. I did not, she is just. She is under my protection. Giovanni squeezes tighter. Which means you just signed your death warrant. Vinny steps forward, practical, ready. Boss, we can take him to the warehouse. Make it clean. No. Giovanni drops Marcus, who crumples to the wet pavement like a puppet with its strings cut, gasping and choking and sobbing already, understanding that he has just made the worst decision of his life. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. I want him to live a long life understanding what he lost. Giovanni makes a call. He speaks rapid Italian, words clipped and precise, instructions given in the tone of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. 30 seconds. 1 minute. He hangs up. Then he turns to Luca. Take Cassandra to the car. Luca approaches her gently, his hand extended. She takes it and he helps her to her feet. Her eye is swelling shut, purple spreading across her cheekbone like a bruise in fast motion. The cut above her eyebrow took for stitches from Giovanni's private doctor, but one is already bleeding again. Handprints darken on her throat, purple and red, the exact shape of Marcus Webb's fingers. Giovanni watches her being led away and something cracks in his controlled expression. Just for a moment. His jaw tightens. A vein appears at his temple. He turns back to Marcus, who is still on his knees in the rain. By morning, every gym in Chicago will know you assault women. By noon, your mother's accounts will be frozen pending fraud investigation. By evening, federal agents will raid your apartment and find evidence of the inheritance theft. Both of you will face 15 to 40 years in federal prison. Marcus is sobbing now, his voice destroyed. Please. I will leave her alone. I swear. Too late. Giovanni's voice is ice wrapped around a blade. You had a choice. You chose violence. He walks away, leaving Marcus broken in the rain. The convoy drives through Chicago's wet streets in silence. The rain pounds against the windows of the SUV. Cassandra is shaking uncontrollably, going into shock, her body betraying her with small tremors she cannot stop. Giovanni sits beside her. He peels off his cashmere coat and wraps it around her shoulders. It smells like expensive cologne and safety, like a fortress built from wealth and power. She can smell his skin underneath. You are safe now. His voice is gentler than she has ever heard it, almost unrecognizable, almost human. I am sorry. She does not know why she is apologizing. For being followed. For almost dying. For existing. You have nothing to be sorry for. He touches her face carefully, examining the damage, his fingers barely brushing her swollen cheekbone. His jaw tightens. Nobody will touch you again. I swear it on my life. At the mansion, the doctor arrives within 20 minutes. He works in Giovanni's private office, cleaning the cut, applying antibiotic ointment, bandaging her wounds with practiced efficiency. He leaves pain medication and instructions. Do not sleep for at least 4 hours. Watch for signs of concussion. Rest. That night, after the doctor has gone and the house has fallen quiet, Cassandra stands in the East Guest Suite bathroom staring at her reflection in the mirror. One eye is swollen completely shut, the lid purple and angry. The other eye looks at her with a stranger's despair. Her cheekbone is mottled with bruises. The cut above her eyebrow took for stitches. Finger-shaped bruises circle her throat like a necklace of violence. The rain pounds against the window. She is so tired. Tired of fighting, of surviving, of being invisible and beaten and dismissed. She opens the window and cold air rushes in, rain spraying her face, soaking her nightgown. She looks down at the stone patio 3 floors below. It would be so easy. Just one step and all the pain stops. Then she sees it. The photo on the dresser. The one item she grabbed from her apartment the night she was evicted. Thomas on their wedding day, smiling at her like she was his whole world. His eyes are bright with love and certainty. She picks up the photo with shaking hands. He loved her. She was somebody to him. She closes the window and slides down to the floor and finally lets herself cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that hurt her bruised ribs, that make her throat scream in agony. She cries for Thomas, for her stolen life, for the girl she used to be. And then, slowly, she stands back up. Because that is what she does. She falls, and she stands back up. The next morning, Salvatore Costa arrives at the mansion. Giovanni's lawyer is 63 years old, grey-haired, impeccably dressed in a suit that costs more than most people's monthly salary. He carries a leather briefcase and a folder of documents thicker than a dictionary. He meets with Giovanni for 2 hours. No one interrupts. No one asks questions. By afternoon, federal agents are gathering in field offices across the city. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Theft by deception. The evidence that Giovanni's team gathered is airtight: forged documents, bank transfers, communications proving conspiracy. Victoria Ashford and Marcus Webb have no defense. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday in mid-April, federal agents raid Victoria Ashford's penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. They come in FBI windbreakers, 12 of them, with a warrant and a list. Victoria is still in silk pajamas, her platinum hair in a sleep must wave, when they knock on the door. Her husband Richard is already gone. He left at 4 a.m. after a phone call from his lawyer. Protection of assets. She is a liability now. The agents move through her penthouse in methodical silence. Boxes of documents go into evidence bags. Her computer. Her phone. Her bank statements. Everything. Neighbors watch from their balconies. Security guards try not to stare. By 7 a.m., Victoria is being led out in handcuffs, her silk pajamas replaced with her own clothes, her face pale and shocked and betrayed. The cameras flash. She tries to shield her face, but the cuffs prevent it. A photographer shouts, "Mrs. Ashford, are these charges related to your stepdaughter?" She does not answer. Her lawyer is already gone. Within a week, Richard files for divorce. Marcus Webb is arrested at his new minimum wage job at a car wash on the south side. He is washing a car, his clothes soaked, his hands raw from chemicals, when 2 federal agents walk across the parking lot toward him. His co-workers see them coming. Everyone sees. The agents tell him to put his hands behind his back. They cuff him in front of his entire shift. By evening, he is in county jail, charged with fraud and assault. The trial lasts 6 weeks. Both plead guilty to avoid worse sentences. Victoria's lawyer negotiates a deal: 15 years in federal prison, total asset forfeiture. Her penthouse will be sold. Her jewelry will be auctioned. Her retirement accounts will be liquidated. She will have nothing. Marcus receives 12 years. Less than his mother, because his role was smaller, because he acted under her direction, because he was younger when it started. The $340,000 in stolen assets is frozen and will be returned to Cassandra after the trial concludes. Victoria's final week of freedom is spent calling lawyers who no longer return her calls. She sits in her penthouse watching the city lights reflect off the lake and understands for the first time that she has lost everything. Not because of justice. Because of love. Because a man she tried to manipulate chose to protect someone else instead. In county jail, waiting for transfer to federal prison, Marcus works in the laundry for 23 cents per hour. His hands bleed from the lye in the cleaning chemicals. His cellmate steals his food. Nobody knows his name. He is inmate 47,829, which means he is nobody now. Just like he made Cassandra feel. He understands finally what he took from her. Not the money. The dignity. Real strength is not found in never falling. It is found in always standing back up. 6 months after the blizzard. December. The same night the city had nearly swallowed her whole. Cassandra Hayes stands in front of a mirror in an apartment she pays for herself, $1,200 per month, rent due on the 1st, and adjusts the collar of her white nursing school uniform. The bruises are gone. All of them. The purple has faded to memory, the yellow to nothing, the swelling around her eye completely resolved. But when she looks at her own reflection, she still sees the woman who bled in Giovanni's kitchen at 3:38 in the morning. The difference is she no longer apologizes for existing. Her phone buzzes. A message from her clinical supervisor, top of the 2nd semester, highest scores in her cohort, commendation letter pending. She reads it 3 times. 2 years ago she was counting change for groceries. Now she is going to save lives. The ring on her left hand catches the light, simple, elegant, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. White gold. 1-carat diamond. He gave it to her in November without kneeling, without drama, just pressed it into her palm during a quiet moment and said, "I have waited long enough." She has worn it every day since, and some mornings she still wakes startled to find it there, proof that this life is real. But 300 miles north, in a federal prison in Kentucky, Victoria Ashford sits in a holding cell waiting for intake processing. Her hair has gone completely grey in 18 months. Not the distinguished silver of aging wealth, but the brittle white of someone whose body is surrendering. She wears orange. She has not worn orange in 72 years. The guards do not know she was ever anyone important. To them she is inmate 52104, just another aging woman convicted of fraud and conspiracy. She thinks about the penthouse. She thinks about the jewelry. She thinks about the social circles that erased her the moment the federal indictment was filed. She thinks about her son, who is currently in a different prison in Indiana, washing dishes for 23 cents an hour, his hands raw from the lye in the cleaning chemicals. She wonders if Cassandra Hayes ever thinks about them at all. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Giovanni Romano stands on the terrace of his mansion overlooking the city. The snow falls thick and purposeful, the same snow that fell the night he found Cassandra on the highway, frozen and alone. His sister Maria arrives tomorrow from Rome with his nephew Oliver, now 7 years old. The boy adores Cassandra. He calls her Aunt Cass. He drew her a picture last month, colors for sad days, he wrote in careful printing, in case she ever needs to remember she is not sad anymore. Giovanni holds a small velvet box in his pocket. Inside is not an engagement ring, she already wears that. Inside is a key. The key to a house 3 blocks from the mansion, a place where they could build something that belongs only to them. He has already bought it. Already furnished it. He is simply waiting for the right moment to place the key in her hand and say, "This is yours, this is ours, I am building the future now instead of just surviving it." The snow crunches under Cassandra's feet as she arrives at the mansion that evening. She still works there, but differently now. Not as a maid invisible in the background, but as estate coordinator, a title that means something, that requires her presence and her voice. The $68,000 salary means she sends money to the shelter that hid her from Marcus the night he cornered her in an alley. It means she sits at Giovanni's conference table during meetings. It means Mrs. Chen asks her opinion on menu planning. She finds Giovanni in his study surrounded by financial documents. Real ones now. His empire is transforming. Legitimacy takes time, but it takes less time when a man decides to rebuild his entire life structure. Restaurants. Hotels. Real estate. All the money still moves, but now it moves through channels that do not require men to disappear. Maria arrives tomorrow, he says without looking up. I know. Oliver has called me 6 times today to tell me about his gift. What did he decide? A telescope. He wants to look at stars and find Daddy in them. Oliver's father died 2 years ago, Giovanni's younger brother, the one who built his childhood out of betrayals and then finally built his death out of consequences. The boy does not remember him clearly, which is perhaps mercy. Giovanni finally looks at her. I have something for you. She steps closer. The study smells like expensive cologne and old leather and the faint ghost of expensive cigars that Giovanni no longer smokes. He has given up so many things. Violence as a first option. Cruelty as a language. The belief that showing weakness means death. He places the key in her palm. It is warm from his pocket. Gold-plated. Ordinary looking except for the weight of it. What is this? Our future. He pulls her down to sit beside him. I bought a house. Nothing like this. Smaller. Ours. Not the mansion, not the business, not the empire. Just a place where we can be what we are without walls between us and the outside world. Cassandra's breath catches. She looks at the key like it might dissolve if she looks away. Giovanni, I cannot accept. Yes, you can. You will. Because you are not accepting charity. You are accepting something we built together. You rebuilt yourself. I rebuilt myself. This is what two people who survived create when they choose each other. He kisses her forehead. Maria will want to stay at the mansion tomorrow night. But the next night, we go to the house. You and me and Oliver. We decorate it for Christmas. We start something new. At exactly that moment, 300 miles south, Marcus Webb sits in the prison cafeteria pushing food around a plastic tray. Boiled chicken. Grey vegetables. A roll that tastes like nothing. His cellmate, a man named Darius who has been here for 8 years, watches him not eat. You got people on the outside? Darius asks. Marcus shakes his head. Nobody calling? Nobody writing. My mother stopped writing after month 3. That is true. Victoria Ashford had written him a letter, one letter, explaining her transfer to a different facility and suggesting he accept his fate with dignity. He has not heard from her since. Where you from? Chicago. I was someone there. Darius laughs, but not unkindly. Everybody was someone. That's the thing about in here. You learn that being someone don't mean nothing if you burn it all down. He stands, picks up his tray, leaves Marcus alone. Marcus thinks about Cassandra. Not often anymore. The thinking hurt too much early on. But it has faded to something duller, not pain but the permanent ache of knowing you destroyed something that could not be fixed. She was his stepsister for 11 years. He watched her work herself into exhaustion paying for his mother's lifestyle. He helped Victoria forge her signature on documents. He cornered her in an alley and demanded the deed to property he had no legal claim to. And then a man he had never met picked her up off a frozen highway and showed her what protection looks like. Marcus has 6 years left. He will be released at 31. His record is destroyed. His future does not exist yet. Some nights he wonders if Cassandra Hayes thinks about him at all. He suspects she does not. Cassandra stands in the doorway of the new house and feels something settle in her chest that has been restless for 2 years. Not peace exactly, but permission. Permission to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. Permission to believe that this is real, that she has earned this, that standing back up from the place where life put her down was the bravest thing she has ever done. Giovanni wraps his coat around her shoulders as the December wind cuts across the porch. Cold? No. I am home. He holds her as the snow falls, as the city lights blur in the distance, as the future arrives quietly like snow does, one flake at a time until the entire world is transformed. Maria's flight lands at O'Hare at 3:15 p.m. the next afternoon. Oliver races through the terminal, all 7-year-old energy and Italian enthusiasm, finds Cassandra waiting and crashes into her with a hug that nearly knocks her over. Aunt Cass. Papa said we are decorating a new house. A house that is just ours and not the big house. Just ours, she repeats, and feels Giovanni's eyes on her face, watching to see if she believes it yet. That evening, they stand in the empty house on Oakwood Avenue with boxes of decorations and a Christmas tree that has not been assembled yet. Maria works the branches into the stand, speaking rapid Italian to her brother, laughing at something he says. Oliver hangs ornaments too low on the trunk and sings off-key and asks 1,000 questions about everything. Cassandra sits on the floor with tissue paper and lights, and she realizes she is happy. Not the desperate relief of survival. The settled contentment of belonging. Giovanni finds her in the kitchen near midnight when everyone else has fallen asleep. She is making tea. The kettle whispers as it heats. Okay, he asks. More than okay. She pours the water into 2 cups, adds honey to his the way he likes it. I visited Thomas's grave yesterday. His hands find her shoulders. Even after months, he is sometimes shocked that he is allowed to touch her without permission, without fear that she will flinch away. What did you tell him? That I fell. That I stood back up. That I found someone who helped me remember my own strength. She turns to face him. That I am happy. Are you? Yes. Completely. For the first time in my life, I am exactly where I want to be. I am exactly who I want to be. He takes the tea from her hands, sets both cups on the counter, pulls her close. Then we are going to keep this. All of it. The house, the future, the way you laugh when Oliver says something ridiculous. We are going to keep it and protect it and never apologize for having built something beautiful out of rubble. We will not, she agrees. She kisses him. The city hums beyond the windows. The snow continues to fall. Two people who were broken stand together in a kitchen that belongs to them, and the future is not something they fear anymore, it is something they are building. 300 miles away, Victoria Ashford lies in a prison bunk and understands finally that she has lost not just her freedom but her immortality. She thought wealth and social status made her permanent. She thought cruelty was a language nobody could punish her for speaking. She was wrong. The world she tried to control moved forward without her. The daughter-in-law she tried to erase became essential to the most dangerous man in Chicago. The son she favored is now a nobody in an orange suit, exactly as powerless as she made Cassandra Hayes feel. Justice came not through revenge but through resilience. The girl she could not break stood back up and became a woman nobody could touch. And in the end, the people who tried to bury Cassandra discovered she was never a victim. She was a survivor. And survivors do not stay down. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Subscribe because we bring you stories like this every single day, stories of justice, resilience, and love that defies the odds. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing? What kept you standing? We read every comment. More stories coming tomorrow. Until then, remember, you are never too broken to stand back up. Thank you for staying with us. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.